This portrait series is an exploration into the role Ojibwe traditional cultural practices and beliefs plays in shaping the way my family sees itself collectively, the role it takes in shaping the personal identities of my husband and my 9 children, and the influences or effect it has had on my own personal identity. As a white woman, the only non-Native person in my immediate family, this exhibit is about my reflections as an outsider and about the emotional roller coaster I often ride as I stand fixed on the outside but privileged enough to look in. This exhibition is not just about the pieces of Ojibwe culture I've been allowed to see, but also what it's allowed me to see within myself and even to recognize what cannot be found there. My children's participation in a particular ceremony required me to make blankets as part of their offering. As these blankets were made as a spiritual offering, the process was very spiritual for me. Because it was the only way I could contribute as a non-Native woman, I poured everything I had into those offerings. I taught myself this art form, and now I cannot seem to let this love affair with fabric go. Even still, though my work is no longer ceremonial, it's very spiritual for me. An image comes to me first. The images are like visions that nag at me, much like a dream you've had that you can't stop thinking about. I feel inspiration channeling through me faster than my fingers can move. When the piece is finished, I ask myself, what was this meant to communicate to me? My son Isaac is now 18 years old, and this representation of him is from when he was 8 years old. I've been holding on to this image of him for a decade, an image that had to be art. It wasn't until after I completed this portrait that I understood what it was saying to me. I didn't realize how much this image says about him and his journey. This expression he's wearing on his face in this portrait is what he wore a lot as a kid. In our house, we call this expression mean mugging. He's got a beautiful intensity about him, which was certainly not lost on you if he was mean mugging you. I think he wore this expression like armor, and I think he felt mad at the world a lot of the time. Isaac is different, and I say that proudly and with great pleasure, but it posed many challenges for him growing up. He was born a gifted and persuasive leader with a fighting warrior spirit. Physically, he was a sight to behold, faster and more acrobatic than anyone. I used to watch him fight imaginary gagas or monsters in the yard, and he would run and flip and climb up a tree and jump back down and throw himself on the ground, all to win the fight. He's incredibly gifted spiritually, and I get the sense that he's spent his life preparing for something that I cannot see, but he can. All of these extraordinarily beautiful gifts would have been exactly what was needed, what was natural to become a great leader or warrior several hundred years ago. He would have been so revered. People would have traveled miles to hear of his visions. There's still time for that, but his gifts were often not welcome in a classroom, where the expectation would be that as a child, you aren't a leader, you're a follower. And as a student, you're much more successful if you simply sit in stillness and listen. This exceptional child of mine experienced a great degree of pain for being who he was, because often those around him, I'm absolutely including myself, would struggle, leading with patience and understanding instead of frustration and anger, which sometimes came more naturally. We often joke about how he drove us all crazy. And as an adult now, with a great sense of humor and more mature perspective, he can laugh with us, and us with him, about all of the crazy stuff that went down. The pieces of his portrait are more rectangular instead of circles like the rest of the portraits in this collection. We've always said that his life experience was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. His portrait being done this way was not intentional, or I should say it was not intentionally representational of this. The connection hit like a brick well after the portrait was completed. The outfit he's wearing is that of a man's, not a boy's, which is why it's falling off of him several sizes too large. The goldfinches are swarming him, and like a bee's nest, you can get stung, but the goldfinches are filling him with such sweetness, such valuable and remarkable gifts, that being close to this young man is definitely worth the risk of being stung. Though the image for this portrait revealed itself so clearly in my mind, it had taken a year following its completion for the meaning to begin to reveal itself to me. When analyzing how light and shadow play out in this portrait, this piece feels almost like a premonition. In this portrait, my son is almost sandwiched between two dark or rough periods in life. Caleb had a very challenging early childhood. He is not biologically of my making or my husband's. My husband's ex-wife struggles with drug addiction and mental health issues, so we have had the great pleasure of raising her child from a previous relationship. Though he had a tumultuous start, he was a very gifted, pleasant, and easy child to raise. His adolescent and young adult years were filled with many blessings as his confidence and capabilities blossomed. Shortly after this portrait was created, he slammed into one of the most challenging periods of his life so far. But like in this portrait, he wrapped himself in his heritage like a scarf in the cold. He looked back on all that he had learned from his traditional culture to prepare him for what was to come. As he faces these struggles, knowing it's out of his control, he's accepting what lies ahead, greeting it with a bouquet in his hands. That's not as if to say facing challenge is easy. The bouquet has a dripping quality like thorns clenched in his fist. He's trying to hold on to positivity as blood releases down his sleeve. But even so, his cultural gifts have prepared him to keep moving forward no matter what comes his way. My self-portrait is in a way the central thesis of this show. It's about the cocktail of both despair and hope that I feel as a mother and wife in this family, and about my purpose in this world. I'm in the dark and naked. I often feel I have nothing to offer my children or my husband. I am of Scandinavian descent, but I don't even know what that means to me. I don't have ways of being handed down and taught with purpose. I don't have things that are known by my people and through my people from ancient times. I don't have spiritual gifts, birthrights to bestow, etc. No toolbox. I'm just out here winging it, loaded up on American culture, gas stations, shopping malls, McDonald's. I didn't realize how little I had until I realized my husband had so much. I didn't know how lost I felt until I became aware of how sure-footed my husband and my children are. But I have hope. The antlers are on top of my head as if to say, there is something incredible about me too. I also possess a spectacular gift. I can't see it, but I can feel it, as though it's within my very bones, passed down from my ancient tribe too. And someday I'll know how to use it and be empowered by it. This portrait is of my daughter Maddie and her family in the sugar bush collecting maple syrup from the trees. I've been asked why my work features my husband's culture, why my own culture is not the central focus of my exhibit instead, insisting that I have a heritage too. As an American, I feel like an orphan, and as an outsider to an indigenous culture, I've become very aware of what I have lost. This is what the non-indigenous people, white Americans more specifically, who insist that I have a heritage too, often can't see. My family extracts maple syrup following traditional practices and rituals. The Ojibwe people know why the syrup is there and how it came to be. They know what happened when people took the trees for granted. They know the medicinal value it holds. They know how to care for the trees physically while extracting syrup, and how to take care of the trees spiritually as well. Gratitude and an understanding and appreciation of the trees as living beings is built into every single part of the process of extraction, and with every single tree tapped. The ritual both recognizes and acknowledges their connection to the earth and to each other. That way of being is so profoundly different from me simply knowing that my ancestors made Swedish meatballs or any other recipe that may have been passed down through generations. It shows me that I am completely disconnected from my tribe, from my heritage, and from the earth. I think it's possible that this accounts for some of the underlying panic and tension around race and culture felt by white America. Yes, we have rituals. Santa and reindeer at Christmas, a bunny at Easter, dress up at Halloween, wear green on St. Patrick's Day so you don't get pinched, etc. Our rituals feel totally devoid of meaning because they are, in a lot of ways, devoid of meaning in today's world. They're about commerce, not enlightenment or connection. I think that the exposure to cultures that appear to hold a tremendous amount of depth and meaning and connection shows us how much we have lost. I think people are desperate to cling to something, anything, even if it is whiteness itself on an incredibly superficial level. I think that the fear is not only of being erased, but feeling like anything meaningful about who we are and where we come from has already been lost. In addition, I believe that it is our disconnection from the earth on a cultural level that is what has led to the environmental crisis we now face. It is also my belief that it will be Indigenous peoples of the world who lead us out of this and help us restore our understanding of our interconnectedness to each other as humans and to all of the other living beings that dwell here on this planet alongside us. My daughter Luella's portrait was the easiest to create. My body just acted on instinct. I felt like I hardly had to think about it at all, almost like it made itself on its own, and I was just a conduit. But the meaning of this portrait was one of the last to reveal itself for me. It took me some time and some help from others to recognize the continuity of the theme of lightness and darkness within this portrait series and what that represents. I've come to realize that darkness represents exactly what you might expect: despair, struggle, disconnect. This image is so fitting of her personality and her relationship to the darkness and the light in life. She is the youngest of 9 children, which means that she is the most tortured by her siblings and most excluded child in our house. When she's tortured and teased, she calmly responds by asserting that she deserves to be respected. Being the youngest, she's used to standing up against her brothers, who are twice her age and size. She has also faced struggles with reading in school and has had to be placed in special programming and been teased for lagging behind. In this portrait, she is almost surrounded by darkness, but she wears an exuberant expression on her face. It's not that she is unaware of the darkness that surrounds her. I think she just doesn't see it as darkness. She's incredibly confident and self-assured. She doesn't internalize the struggles she faces, and she will find the beauty, the joy, the light, where others would be weighed down by negativity or blinded by fear. It's because she carries the light inside her, and she knows it. The meaning within this portrait has not yet fully revealed itself for me. The decisions I make when I'm creating a portrait are not what will the image be. I feel like that is instead decided for me. So the decisions I make are on how to best recreate the image in my head. It's not until the end that I ask myself, now what does this mean? Often the meaning comes in waves or layers over time, and sometimes this revelation can take months. And like the interpretation of a dream, You, as an observer, may have insights into the meaning that either are or are for the time being lost on me. These images may speak to you in a way that they do not speak to anyone else. For several of the portraits in this show, the story has not yet completely revealed itself for me. It is in the process of slowly unfolding. And for the pieces I feel I've adequately deciphered, I still continue to make new connections to see things that I hadn't before. The meaning within this portrait had not yet fully revealed itself for me, but my 17-year-old son shared with me some incredible insights into her portrait that definitely speaks to me. He said that what he saw is that in my heaviest portraits, Prayer for Jordan and Robert, the darkness and despair in those portraits are represented in the left bottom corner of the piece and extend out from there. And the lightness and hope in those pieces are visually depicted in the upper right-hand corner. Jordan can't see the light, but that is the direction the goldfinches are coming from. Robert isn't looking at the light, but he knows it's there, showing it to the kids who are fully facing it. Those are connections I had not yet made. To him, in this portrait, Mia has grown up too fast, and I agree. She does not behave like a 10-year-old. I often tease her that I think this isn't her first time on this earth. This child of mine is wise beyond her years, academically, emotionally, and spiritually. She skipped the 3rd grade and was moved into a 4th and 5th grade class, where she quickly rose to the top academically. They were worried she'd get bored, but when she finished her work, she enjoys helping others. This child of mine also, at age 3, told me that mosquitoes had the right to eat too, as I watched her sit incredibly still, letting them suck her blood. She participated in her first spiritual ceremony at age 3. When she did, she only came out of the wigwam to go to the bathroom, and she would run there and back. I would try to kiss her and hug her as she ran, but she would say, "Mom, let go. I don't want to miss anything." And so she sat there in silence all day with the grown-ups. Her contribution in equal measure to theirs. To Elias, Mia has taken the weight of the world upon her shoulders, visually represented by the blanket she wears, and she is pulling us all out of the darkness and into the light. After this portrait was created, I knew instantly that the goldfinches, the Ojibwe cultural toolbox, was what my son was using to guide his hand, showing him where to aim his attentions in life. The hunt. It can mean many things to many people across cultures. This is what it means to my son. When my son got his first deer at his very young age, he not only was responsible for taking the deer's life, but he was responsible for cleaning the deer and removing all of the meat from the bones for packaging. We then held a special ceremony. A first kill feast is a traditional rite of passage in our household. As his mother, I ceremonially and physically offer my son a bite of the meat he has provided. He holds up his hand and refuses me and says, "No, I am thinking of the elders who cannot hunt for themselves." I offer him a taste again, and he refuses me again. "No, I am thinking of all of the children who don't have enough to eat." I offer him a taste again, and he refuses me. "No, I am thinking of my community and all of the people who came here to support me." I offer him a taste once more, and he finally accepts the meat. My husband then tells him that he has just changed his life. He says, "Up to this point, you have relied on others to provide for you, and now you can provide not only for yourself, but for others too. This is what it means to be a provider." When you achieve great success and abundance, whatever that means, whether it's an animal you've killed, rice you've harvested, or money you've made, it's your responsibility to think about your elders, young children, and other members of your community. That is what it means to be a provider. That is what it means to be a man. You have changed your life today, and no longer a child. You are now a man. After the feast, he then packages up all of the meat he has provided, and he gives it all away. How does one become a man in American culture? Is it when you can drive? Or when you get your first job? Is it turning 18, a magical number? Does that hold meaning? What does it mean to be a man? What defines manhood? In today's culture, I honestly don't know. In this portrait, my son is no longer holding an arrow because he's no longer on the verge of manhood trying to prove himself. His arrow has already landed. He's already accepted the responsibilities of manhood with Ojibwe traditional teachings as his guide. This portrait is about my husband's life's work as an educator and an activist preserving his language and culture for generations to come. The goldfinches are flying out of his mouth as he bestows these gifts to our son. This portrait took about 5 full days just to sew it. When I'd finished and had laid it out flat on my kitchen table to admire it, I quickly realized that it would not lay flat. It had ripples that created circles in the center of the portrait. At the time, I'd intended to stretch my portraits over a frame like a canvas, but this one would not lay flat. I cried, not knowing enough about sewing to know what I'd done wrong or how in the world I was going to fix it. I felt completely incompetent. I walked away from it in a panic, hopeful that if I just took some time to breathe, that I'd figure it out. I went to bed, couldn't sleep, came back out in the middle of the night and spread it out in front of me again. I'd always felt like these portraits weren't mine, that I was just the vessel from which they came. Then suddenly, when I looked at this piece and the unintended circular movement that had shown up unexpectedly, they looked like ripples in a pond. That is exactly the nature of my husband's life's work. To effect change, one small movement that steadily grows and expands exponentially over time. I don't know how it got there, but it absolutely belonged there. A sacred symbol for many cultures, the circle, an ancient and universal symbol for wholeness and unity. My son Robert dropped out of college to raise my daughter's 2 small children after Child Protective Services removed them from her care following a drastic downward spiral with drug abuse. The images for these portraits are not intellectualized. What I mean by that is that I don't approach a portrait thinking about what I want to say and then strategize how to portray or represent that. Instead, they come to me like visions for me to decipher. Lightness and darkness have revealed themselves to be very thematic in this particular series of portraits and have presented a kind of continuity throughout this body of work. Both my son and my 2 grandchildren have seen some dark days. But in this portrait, my son is ushering in the support of his traditional cultural teachings. The goldfinches are rushing in on all sides to support their journey, guiding them out of the darkness and into the light. Robert is facing outward towards the children. I think perhaps it's the children who are guiding my son instead of the other way around. Being a father has led him back to his heritage and allowed him to fully embrace the depth and the beauty of living life traditionally. Fatherhood has inspired him to open his cultural toolbox and to appreciate all of the gifts within it. Jordan is my oldest child. She has struggled with drug addiction for a decade, has been in and out of treatment, in and out of jail, and has lost her children who are featured in the portrait of my son Robert, who dropped out of college to raise them when they were removed from my daughter's care. This portrait is a prayer that those cultural and spiritual ways of being may overcome her vision by blocking her access to the destructive influences she has become fixated on. The cultural toolbox, as I like to call it, is a birthright, but it was also gifted to her, and it feels as though she has neglected to open the box for some time now. The wire mesh that I mounted my pieces on are visible in parts of this portrait, representing the cage both literally and figuratively that she keeps not only her heritage in, but the cage her body and spirit are in as well, having been placed behind bars several times. I encourage all of you to be prayerful as you interact with those two particular portraits. As uncomfortable as it is for me to publicly share her private struggles, I know that she can't do this all alone. I believe that the more we see each other, actually see each other, the more love and support we can generate from each other. I also believe in the power of prayerful thoughts, and it is my hope that by sharing this, she will have the full weight and breadth of this community rallying behind her, because prayers are incredibly powerful.